Hi, I'm Brickroad, and today we are not in Princess Peach's foyer. Instead, we are in some kind of black netherscape with Final Fantasy world maps floating hilariously off in the distance, and so it must be time to share another tabletop simulator mod for Villainous Final Fantasy. And we also have this swank new table featuring a villain who does not have a deck in Villainous Final Fantasy, but today we're going to talk about Sin. Sin is one of the primary antagonists from Final Fantasy X. He is a force of nature that seeks to destroy the world, and so that's what the Sin deck is all about. With the release of this deck, the Tabletop Simulator mod is now available for download in the Steam Workshop. That link will be down in the doobly-doo if you want to check it out for yourself. Currently, the only 4 decks playable in the public version of the mod are Garland, Golbez, Arden, and Sin, who we're going to learn about today. So here's Sin's villain guide, and Sin's objective is to begin its turn with 12 destruction tokens in its realm. Here is Sin's realm here. As you can see, he's got 4 locations like everybody else. Oceans of Spira is a special location in his realm. The other 3 locations he has to completely destroy by adding these destruction tokens. Once the world is totally destroyed, everything's annihilated, Sin wins as long as his board is still in that state at the beginning of his next turn. Because he's got to spend a lot of his turns placing destruction tokens, Sin has a special space on the board, the Oceans of Spirit, where it can take an action at this location before moving if he's there at the start of his turn. Sin doesn't have a power 3 space on his board, which most villains do, and the power 1 spaces he has have another function that you'll see in just a second. So it's important that he has a power 2 space here. He can move here on one turn, take the game power 2, and then his next turn when he starts here, he can take the power 2 again before moving. And in practice, that's what most Sin players have done, alternating turns at the Oceans of Spira and elsewhere in his realm. Sin's win condition involves placing 4 destruction tokens on each location in his realm. The most basic way to do this is to move there and take the gain power action. He can take the gain power action to gain power just like every other villain, or he can take it to add a destruction token to his realm. The destruction tokens cover up action symbols. So for example, if you move to Zanarkand and you take the gain power action and use it to place a destruction token, you end up destroying the play a card button in the top left corner of Zanarkand. That means Sin can no longer play a card using that action in Zanarkand. So to help him out as far as action economy goes, a lot of the cards in his deck do have this location gains abilities, so he has extra abilities on his board he can strategically place to make sure that he doesn't get himself boxed in and not be able to do anything on his turn. And finally, because placing 1 destruction token at a time is very slow, he's got a couple cards in his deck that can place multiple destruction tokens at a time, which we'll see as we go through Sin's deck now. So up first we have 6, count them, 6 of these Sin scales. 5 and 6. So these are 2 strength allies. They come out for free. Sin can play these all day long. And they're just the basic ally. This is the baseline for how Sin is going to guard his realm from the insidious heroes that will come in and, for some reason, prevent the world from being destroyed. But Sin has lots of other allies. Here we have Grand Maester Mika. This is in the deck just so Sin has an alternate way to gain power. You go and take a gain power action one turn, place a destruction token on the board. The next turn you can go activate Mika to change that destruction token, cash it back in, and turn it into 3 power. So you're getting a net gain of 2 power if you choose to use Mika's ability. Next we have Lady Unaleska. She puts a move hero button in Sin's realm. We then have Yu Yevon. Yu Yevon puts a little more power on the board, and because it's a gain power action that ends up in one of those locations, you can use it to place a destruction token. You can move somewhere, use the location's gain power to put 1 token, use Yu Yevon's ability to place a 2nd token, and in order to counteract this, heroes that are played to Yu Yevon's location cover up its action symbol. In the game, Yu Yevon is just this weakling little thing that you kill very, very easily, so this is just a nod to the theming of Final Fantasy X. Next we have Jecht. Jecht is probably the strongest card in Sin's deck. Destruction tokens in Jek's location don't cover action symbols, so you can completely demolish a location, then play Jekt there, then still have the ability to play all of the actions. Getting Jekt into a location that has very useful action symbols, for example Xanarkand, which has double play, discard, and a gain power 1, can be very important to Sin's endgame, just so he has the tools he needs in place to bring that victory home. Finally, we have Seymour. Seymour has an incredibly useful activate ability that he can discard Sin Scales, which we've played all over the realm for free, and change them into destruction tokens. We've had a couple of Sin wins, and I think I'm pretty confident in saying you can't really win with this deck without getting Seymour out and doing that at least once. But if you've done it once and you want to do it again, got this card called Launch Sin Scales. You can play this to pull Sin Scales that you've discarded out of your discard pile, put them back on the board, so you can discard them all over again for even more destruction. Sin has 2 of these U Pagodas. These are items he plays. Their main function is they have an activate function to get you Yevon out of the deck and into your hand, but they also each add a different action symbol back into Sin's realm. He's got an extra play a card, and he's got a vanquish here. So if you destroy the play a card and vanquish in other locations, you still have access to them through the U Pagodas. Sin has 2 of these tidal waves. What you can do with this card is move to a location that already has some destruction tokens, place another one there because the gain power button is still available, then play this card and play a second destruction token to an adjacent location you haven't started destroying yet. Sin has 2 of these in his deck, and if you manage to get them both out in one turn, on the same turn you say activate Seymour, you can pull off about half of your win condition in one move. Sin has 2 of these impenetrable outer shells that just boost the strength of his Sin Scales, which are his primary way of killing heroes. But he's got lots of other ways to kill heroes. For example, he can attach Gravisia to them to reduce a hero's strength to 1, to make it very, very easy to kill them with a strength 2 Sin Scale. He has 2 of these cards, Sin's Toxin, that lets him go into his Fate deck. If there are heroes at the top of his Fate deck, he can put them on the bottom, so he doesn't have to worry about seeing those heroes for a while. He has Stone Touch. This is useful for attaching to one of his stronger allies, so they don't get discarded when they defeat heroes. Sin's in a bad place if he has to use, say, Seymour or Yunalesca to defeat a hero, which then discards them as allies. This lets them stay in their realm so they can continue to help him by having their action buttons available. We also have Swallowed by Geos Gyno. Typically, heroes cannot be played to the Oceans of Spira location on Sin's board. A couple of heroes can, and of course Sin can move heroes there if he wants. That's a prime location to get covered because it's got a play a card and a gain 2 power button on the top of the realm. So heroes that can be covered here really cripple Sin, who, remember, he's counting on being able to take actions there twice in a row on 2 consecutive turns. So having a card in his deck that lets him just get rid of a hero in that space for very, very cheap can help him keep his realm clear of heroes so he can keep moving and keep destroying things. Sin has 2 of these cards, Swarm of Fireflies. Because the deck has very little wiggle room, you can get yourself kind of boxed in if you break the action icons in the wrong locations. He's got a couple of free cards that lets him move destruction tokens from one location to another just to correct some mistakes that he might make along the way. He has 2 of these cards, Jiskel's Legacy. This is a condition he can play on another player's turn to help him get Seymour into his hand, so probably one of the most important cards in the deck. And then finally he has 2 of these cards, Sacrilege's Contraptions. This is a very situational card because his Fate deck has very powerful items that can get attached to heroes. If that happens and Sin's not in a position to take care of the hero directly, he's got this card to at least get rid of the item for now. So let's go over to Sin's Fate deck and see why he might want to do that. So first up we have Tidus, and there's also Waka and Riku. Tidus, Waka, and Riku are special because they can be played to Oceans of Spira. In Final Fantasy X, these 3 characters can inexplicably breathe underwater for extended periods of time, so these are the only heroes that it's valid to be played to Oceans of Spira during a Fate action. Then we have Yuna, one of the 4 heroes that cannot be played to Oceans of Spira. Yuna is the strongest character in this deck because Sin can't place destruction tokens to her location. It kind of becomes pretty obvious pretty early on where Sin wants to put his tokens and what order he wants to destroy his locations in, and Yuna can throw a real wrench into that work. So to that end, we also have Kimahri and Lulu, who have special abilities. If they're in the same location as Yuna is, Sin has to defeat them before Yuna. Wakka also has the same ability, so Yuna's got 3 Guardians that can take the kill for her if need be. The final hero is Orin. Because Sin Scales are Sin's primary way of defeating heroes, we've got this card in the deck to just make sure he can't do that, so he's got to give up one of his powerful allies, or use that Stone Touch, or find a way to get him to the oceans and get him swallowed by Geoskyno. We have 2 of these cards trigger command. This might be the single worst screenshot I've had to put on a card, but I didn't have another idea for how to display this card graphically. So, what this card is able to do is stop Sin for 1 turn. Because Sin typically alternates between a location to play destruction tokens and then back to the Oceans of Spira to play cards or gain power, this card forces him to move to Oceans of Spira, and then he's not allowed to move. This robs him of his free action that he usually gets, and it also means he can't play a destruction token to another location by taking the gain power action there. We have 2 of these level 1 key spheres. This is the hard stop on Sin. When Sin moves on its turn, you remove a destruction token from the hero's location. If you attach this to a hero in his realm, it becomes very important for him to get rid of this key sphere as early as possible. Of note, you can't prevent Sin from winning by using the key sphere. If he's got all 12 destruction tokens, you can't fate him and play a key sphere because he starts his turn and wins the game. This doesn't go off until he moves on his turn. But if you get this on the board when he's got 5 or 6 destruction tokens, it can really hamper his mid-game. We also have the Celestial Weapon. This is just a generic item that gives a hero +1 strength. We have Hymn of the Faith. This is a card that can prevent Sin from winning. If there are heroes in his realm, this can remove up to 3 destruction tokens at once. So there's only 1 of these cards in the Fate deck, and you probably don't want to see it if it comes out real early. Finally, we have Welcome to Owakas. What this helps you do is you see those key spheres get put into Sin's discard pile early in the game. If you're fading him early, you can use Owaka later on to fish them out and put them on heroes towards the end of the game. And that's about it for Sin's deck. This deck is a little unique in that it's barely been revised. I think we've made 2 changes to it over the course of playtesting. Everybody says it feels pretty good. It feels pretty balanced. We've seen some Sin wins. We've also seen games where he didn't win but got very close. Sin is a slow and steady character. He will win the game unless people fate him properly and stop him from doing so. So keep that in mind if you're playing and Sin is at your table. So that's it for Sin. Again, the Tabletop Simulator mod is available on the workshop. The first 4 villains are available to play if you'd like to go download and play the game yourself. Now, before I let you go, I thought I'd take you over to the Final Fantasy Villainous dev table where all of the other in-development decks are hanging out. You can see down here we have the 4 decks that I've already showed you. Those are all ready to go. But up here, we have the 4 decks that are still in playtesting. This is Queen Braun from Final Fantasy IX, and this is, I think, the closest one I have that's almost ready to prime time. Queen Braun is a very technical deck, and you can win with her, but it does seem like a few mistakes leaves you very far behind with this deck. It's very, very easy to screw up. I developed the deck, and I had to play it 4 times before I finally got a win with it. Every time I see this deck played, I think of 1 or 2 changes I want to make, but I end up not making them because overall she does seem balanced with the other decks. I just worry that she's a little too tricky to get the hang of to really hang with everybody else. That's what I'm keeping an eye on when it comes to playtesting. Over here we have Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. This is by far the craziest deck I've designed. Kefka has 2 villain decks and 2 discard piles, and he's impossible to keep track of if you're playing against him. Version 1.0 of this deck had a terrible hard lock that meant the game just went on forever and nobody could ever win. We've cleared up that problem, but there's still some things I'm looking at in Kefka games that get played. Something tells me he'll be the last deck that I release to the mod. Up here we have Shantoto, and if you've been wondering why my videos have been very thin the past couple weeks, Shantoto from Final Fantasy XI is the reason why, because I've been going really hard in Final Fantasy XI to play through certain content and get assets for her deck. It's been a trying experience, and I want to know that you're all there for me in spirit. Anyway, Shantoto had 2 runaway wins the first night we played her, and so I tweaked the deck, and then it became kind of unplayable, so we're trying to find a sweet spot where she's winnable and is fun, but also balanced with the other decks. I don't want her deck to be too easy or too hard. Finally, over here, we have Ultimisia from Final Fantasy VIII. This is the newest deck that I've introduced to the dev table. I've only seen her played once, but what I've seen was encouraging. The deck didn't break, and the player didn't win, but was sitting very close to Ultimisia's win condition when the game was over, which is kind of what you want to see. At the end of a game of Villainous, you want everybody at the table to be within 1 or 2 turns of their win condition, if you can. While I was making the 8 core decks, I had ideas for 2 more. These decks are not even playable yet. They don't have cards, they're just boards. The first is Gilgamesh from Final Fantasy V, etc. And this other one is Magus from Chrono Trigger, which is a Final Fantasy game as far as I'm concerned. So there's still a lot of playtesting to do. If you think you might want to learn to play Villainous, there is a link to my Discord down in the doobly-doo. Please pop into the chat. We'd be delighted to bring you to the table, teach you how to play the game, and you can help us playtest these other decks and get the mod rolling. Thank you so much for watching.